In my first Counter Reformation lecture, I talked about the Protestant challenge to the Roman Catholic Church and how the Church and its political supporters began to fight back. Do you recognize the head that I have rather ineptly pasted onto the Empire Knight's body? Yep, that's Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits and a self-described soldier of Christ out to defend the church militant. You've already looked at rather contradictory eyewitness accounts of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and as history detectives you puzzled over what may really have happened. The painter of this painting is a French Huguenot who may have been an eyewitness. We know for certain that a close relative, the surgeon Antoine Dubois, died in the massacre. That's his body hanging out the window, and I've circled it. By the way, art is often an important source of historical information. Art was also a focus of violence in the wars of religion. This altarpiece in a German church was attacked and defaced by a Protestant mob in 1566. In fact, in that year, there were attacks all over Europe, particularly in Northern Europe, on Catholic churches. So let's watch a short video clip about iconoclasm and the church's response. And then we'll take a look at how the church artistically struck back. I should note that just as wars of religion have not, alas, died out, and we're going to talk more about that soon, neither has destroying works of art in the name of religion. This and other 6th century statues of Buddha in central Afghanistan were dynamited and destroyed by the Taliban in March of 2001. This is the same group, by the way, that sheltered Osama bin Laden, who used Afghanistan as a base for planning the attack on the World Trade Center, which they also blew up just a few months later. You may recall that we talked about ISIS and the persecution of Christians, the group that we're now fighting in Iraq and Syria, this Islamic army, is also blowing up Christian churches and the mosques of Muslims that they disagree with. This is the Sunni Shiite fight that we'll be discussing very soon. Here's a recent photo of an attack on a mosque. But let's get back to how the Catholic Church strikes back. I'm cutting out a portion of the Khan Academy podcast that reviews the Council of Trent, but the entire video will be available on Moodle, and if you're feeling confused about any of this, it's actually a good review. So, on the left we see a drawing of a church in the Netherlands after it's been stripped of all those images that offended the more extreme Protestants. I should note, by the way, that Luther was not himself a supporter of destroying art. The painter Cranach, those portrayals of Luther you've seen were painted by a good friend of his. He was a supporter of art, and there was quite spectacular Protestant art in Germany. But many of the more extreme Protestants, particularly Calvin and followers of Calvin and Zwingli, were totally opposed to art in churches and would destroy it. So, on the right, you have a very ornate altar. What is the Catholic strategy here? Basically, they're betting that people will be moved and inspired by the ornate decoration, the visual display. They are unabashedly appealing to emotion as the Protestants are attempting to appeal to reason. So stop and think for a second. Which of these approaches would you guess would be most successful with most people? I actually think the best way to get a feeling for the Catholic strategy is to look at the church that in some ways started the whole fight off, St. Peter's in Rome, the Pope's home cathedral, the most important church in the Catholic Church. This is a painting of the interior, but to get a real sense of St. Peter's visual whammy, I'd like to take you on a quick virtual tour. By the way, the video that I've included, I think, is someone's travel video uploaded to YouTube, but I liked it. It's well done and it's short. The Catholic Church did not just enlist priests in its Counter Reformation battle. It enlisted artists as well. The purpose, as we saw in the video, was to inspire the faithful and attract Protestants back into the Catholic Church. It's prettier, it's more emotionally exciting, is the argument. More mainstream Protestants, as I mentioned, eventually fought back with their own artists. It was a little like the Lutherans and the Jesuits duking it out over who could educate more kids, and everyone really won this war of religion, which, after that first wave of iconoclasm, produced some of the most spectacular art ever created. This was what is referred to as the Baroque era by art historians, a real high point in painting and architecture and sculpture. So I'm going to show you some paintings by my favorite Counter Reformation artist, maybe my favorite painter of all, Caravaggio. By the way, I've mentioned that this is Baroque. Caravaggio was not especially saintly. I don't think that Loyola would have accepted him into the Jesuit ranks. So, for example, he murdered a man in a duel over a prostitute after castrating his opponent first, and he was in constant trouble with the law. He made church leaders very nervous, but not so nervous that they did not keep commissioning his paintings for churches. So the Calling of Matthew, which you see here, is probably his most famous painting. It captures a moment described in the Bible when Jesus approaches the tax collector, Matthew, and tells him to, or asks him, I should say, to leave his life behind and become a disciple. Look at the painting for a moment. What makes it so powerful? One answer, and this is typical of the Baroque painting of the Italian Counter Reformation art, is the very dramatic use of light. What does this remind you of when the light shines into the darkness on people's faces? It's a lot like theater. And the church certainly did not think it was producing a work of fiction, a play, but there was a definite desire to create a more theatrical and emotional impact, and Caravaggio was brilliant about that. We also see a vision of Christ coming into ordinary life, of being part of the real world, if you will. And here I think Caravaggio, although very much a Catholic, not a Protestant, is picking up on some of this Protestant idea of what Martin Luther would call the priesthood of all believers. Here's another painting. This is St. Paul on the road to Damascus having a vision of Christ. Again, an ordinary fellow, kind of a creep actually, and God is coming into his world. Notice again the theatrical lighting and the way that we're kind of drawn into this painting. Notice how it's kind of cropped off. The person looking at this painting is almost a part of it. We're right there in the foreground. Again, this is drawing worshipers, drawing individuals into this spiritual experience. Remember that almost all of this art would have appeared in churches. Here we have another Caravaggio of David and Goliath. Interestingly enough, Caravaggio painted his own portrait as Goliath. So why might he paint himself as a decapitated head? Well, I've mentioned that Caravaggio was a bad boy, but he was also a devout Catholic. He was very aware of his sins. And in many ways, this is sending a message. I am a sinner. You are sinners. Repent and return to the church. Both of these paintings tell the story from the book of Judith, which, by the way, is a book in the Catholic canon, but not in the Protestant canon. Judith is a brave Jewish widow who murders the Assyrian general who's going to be attacking Israel. Before he can attack, basically, she sneaks into his camp, plies him with wine, gets him lovesick and drunk, cuts off his head and escapes, brings the head back, hangs it on a pole. The Assyrians are scared and they run off. But again, what features of Counter-Reformation art, of Baroque art, do you see? We see the high drama, we see the lighting, we see the way the picture is kind of cut off, again, cropped, if you will, to draw us in. These are close-ups. I mean, think of the difference between taking a photograph with some sort of a landscape feature and taking, a close-up selfie or getting right in your friend's face. These are in-your-face paintings. The artist wants you to be part of this. I should note, by the way, that Artemisia Gentileschi was a woman painter, one of the first prominent painters, and she was actually very popular with the church. They gave her a lot of business. She was much better behaved than Caravaggio and simply a lot less trouble. Now, people were shocked by Caravaggio's paintings because he used ordinary people, and in fact, his model for Judith was a well-known prostitute, and the model for Judith's maidservant was a well-known Roman pimp or procuress, and she was a female. So what point might he have been making? Well, again, Caravaggio's paintings are all about God coming into the life of ordinary people and transforming them. And so he chose ordinary people as his models. Now, not all Counter Reformation painters followed his lead. Rubens, for example, did lots of aristocratic paintings. But note that Caravaggio was using art to bring Bible and God alive to ordinary people in the way that Luther was trying to do by translating the Bible into German. In many ways, although it's different strategies and has different doctrinal bases, you have kind of the same aim of bringing the church into the world and to reach out to everyone, and certainly that was what Ignatius of Loyola was trying to do. So in a way, Caravaggio's paintings are like Luther's German translation of the Bible. They send the message that God's salvation is for all. I've already said this, but in the end, I'd argue that Catholics won the art fight. In the spirit of, if you can't beat them, join them. Caravaggio's art, that this branch, at least, of Counter-Reformation art became extremely influential in the Protestant North. There was no country that was more Protestant than Holland, and no other country besides Italy that produced more spectacular, maybe Spain, that produced more spectacular art in this period. So while some Protestants stuck with Calvin's no art program, Caravaggio's style was widely imitated. And here you see Rembrandt's painting of another Bible scene. What similarities do you see to the Caravaggio paintings or the painting by Artemisia Gentileschi? Well, again, you have very expressive emotion, and you have this dramatic theatrical lighting. This is about appealing to the senses. On the other hand, the Protestant ideas did affect art. The Reformation emphasized that each individual had to seek out God for him or herself. It was a religion of the individual. It was also often the religion of the rising middle classes. And they were consumers of portraits. And one result was this was a golden age of portraiture, particularly, again, in the Protestant North and in Holland. Protestant artists also focused more on life in this world. They were not as otherworldly folk. There were not as many pictures of heaven or of saints, but there were increasingly spectacular landscapes, in the sense worshiping God by worshiping nature. Also, as Caravaggio painted ordinary people, many of the Northern Protestant painters captured ordinary life and its beauties. You've probably seen this picture, one of the great interior pictures of a domestic scene. Also of household objects. So, let's end with this question. Who won the war? Oops. Was it the Empire or was it the Rebel Alliance? Well, we still have Protestants and Catholics today. The Catholics did not succeed in wiping out Protestantism or luring all the Protestants back into the fold. Protestants did not convince all Christians to leave the Catholic Church. And in fact, in the years after the Counter-Reformation, there were significant areas of Europe that returned to the Catholic Church, partly by conviction, partly by the power of the sword. So the Catholic Church won back large numbers of Christians in France, in Poland, and Hungary, and what is now the Czech Republic and Slovakia. perhaps even more significantly, you have a huge impact in the world where Catholic missionaries led by Jesuits converted most of Latin America. This is the purple, and large chunks of Africa to Catholicism. Protestants competed in Africa and Asia as well for converts. And if the Protestant-Catholic divide does not put you in a St. Bartholomew's Day massacre sort of mood, you could argue the result is that more people heard the gospel, and the result was a spread of education to many, and of the Christian religion to many corners of the world. So, alas, as I mentioned, religious warfare has reignited. And we're going to return in my final lecture in this unit to the fight between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Look at some of the parallels to the wars of religion in Europe. See you there.